mama. You've reached day 5 of life with your new baby. We're in hour 96 to 120. That's how long you've been a mother for. And I'm sure it's been quite a roller coaster of emotions and learning and deep learning, because having a new baby is not for sissies. So by now, hopefully you are beginning to find your groove. Your milk supply is starting to normalize. Your breasts shouldn't be feeling quite so engorged as before. Definitely not the fullness that you experienced previously. The body is kind of working out how much to make, how much your baby needs. If they are still engorged, keep up with feeding frequently, emptying them frequently. It will normalize. What I want to chat with you a little bit about today is something that we call the 5 states of consciousness. And what that is understanding that babies, and you'll start seeing this, and it'll become a little bit more apparent now that you are a little bit calmer and the milk has come in. But babies move through deep sleep, light sleep, drowsy, awake and content, awake and fussing, and crying, which is actually 6. Did I say 5? I mean 6 states of consciousness. Okay. Now, in the first 24 hours, baby was quite sleepy, so spent a lot of time in deep sleep. But now that baby's more, you're seeing more of a variation between awake and asleep. And what you'll notice that is when your baby wakes up initially for a feed, they will usually wake up and there's a moment of awake, alert, content, looking around. Then they start fussing because now they're woken up for a feed. So that's awake and fussing. And if you don't respond to that need to be fed, especially at this stage where they pretty much do wake to be fed, they will then start crying. And we talk about that as a late feeding cue. Just one moment. We talk about that as a late feeding cue, which doesn't mean that you've missed it. It just means that if the baby's already crying, what we need to do is bring them down one level to awake and fussing, and then awake content, in order to bring them to the breast and help them to feed. Once they're on the breast, and they'll have a really, really good feed. And in a moment, I'm going to talk about 3 types of sucking. So this is kind of like 6 states of consciousness, three types of sucking. We've gone through the 3 states of sucking, and we're now on flutter sucking. So it means that we're coming towards the end of the feed, and you notice that your baby starts getting drowsy. Their little eyes start closing. You can see their body is softening. They're relaxing. And if you leave them at the breast and they stop sucking, they'll go into a light sleep and eventually a deep sleep. Now, long term, you don't necessarily want your baby sleeping at the breast, because at some stage you want to get a little life back. You need to get up and shower. You need to go to the bathroom. You need to eat a meal. You need to look after yourself. So knowing these little things will help you. Oh, my baby's going into drowsy now, light sleep. I can take them off the breast. Now, when you take them off the breast and they're light sleep, they will startle awake. What are you doing? They'll immediately start going back to the breast, because that's their comfy place. It's their happy place. They want to be there. So it's about recognizing and trusting yourself enough to know that they've had a good feed, so that even though you've taken them off the breast, you can distract them for long enough to realize, oh, actually, I was going off into a lovely sleep and I want to go back there. And it'll usually be with rhythmic patting, or even putting them down and rhythmic patting, or swaddling, finding what works for you. I don't want to go into too much detail here. I want to stick to kind of understanding patterns of behavior, because what I want to do is get them into a deep sleep. So if they're in a light sleep and they've woken and startled, to get them back to a light sleep and guide them into a deep sleep. Because once they're in a deep sleep, I can expect them to sleep for at least 45 to 90 minutes, 90 and longer. But at 90, I'd be expecting a little bit, maybe they'll take another 40, but their sleep cycle is usually 45 minutes. So looping as many of those as possible. Because if from the light sleep, I'm going to take back, so the ideal situation is to get them back and guide them into deep sleep. If for some reason from that light sleep, I startle them too much and start fussing and changing nappies and whatever, what I'm doing is I'm going back up the staircase and I'm taking them to awake and fussing, awake and crying. And to get them into deep sleep, I need to come all the way down to awake fussing, awake content, drowsy, light sleep, deep sleep. So it's a much longer process, and it just means you need to be a little bit more patient. It's not impossible, but understand that if they go to crying, they've got a long way to come back to deep sleep. So if I'm seeing the light sleep, I want to immediately guide them into deep sleep if I'm confident and that they've had a good feed. And a good feed means that I've gone through the 3 types of sucking. So let's go to that. The 3 types of sucking are call-up sucking, which is a quick, that's the moment they come on the breast and they are ready for a feed, and they are sucking quickly and hungrily to get the milk to let down and to start flowing. As soon as the milk starts flowing, the sucking pattern changes, becomes slower, more deep, and nutritive, are now drinking and swallowing. And that is the bulk of the feed, will be nutritive sucking. And depending on your baby's age, depending on your baby's size, and depending on other factors like lip tie and tongue tie, whether that's been released or not even discovered yet, will depend on how long that period of nutritive sucking is. But I'm going to give you guidelines. It can be as quick as 5 and as long as 20 minutes. The average is 7 to 12 minutes. 12 to 15 would be good, okay? After that, so you will know by your baby from watching and learning what their average period of nutritive sucking is. But what we do know is even when they're nutritive sucking, they're still going to be taking pauses, but they will come back and suck deeply, pause, suck deeply, pause, and swallowing in between. After a period of about 12 to 15 minutes, you will notice that the pauses start getting longer and they need a little bit of stimulation to go back to nutritive sucking. Left alone, that nutritive sucking would then become very shallow and turn what we call flutter sucking. And the reason I call it flutter sucking, and you probably would have seen this if you're already breastfeeding, is that their little mouth goes on the breast. So it's really shallow, and then it'll be a very quick, very shallow suck. Now, we sometimes call that comfort sucking. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing, but I want you to be aware of it, because in the initial stages, it'll be good for getting a supply. But later on, when your supply is established and you've got more of a routine, comfort sucking can go on for hours and can get in the way of you trying to get stuff done. So knowing it's comfort sucking means that you can replace it with something else. And I don't want to go into too much detail about that now, more at understanding those 3 types of sucking. So to go back to the 6 states of consciousness, when you're feeding your baby, you know that towards the end of a feed, when they've gone into flutter sucking, they are now drowsy, probably heading towards a light sleep, and the next stage would be deep sleep. So I want to break the suction off the breast by putting my little finger, breaking the suction, taking them off, and allowing them and helping them go into deep sleep. If you feel, and remember some babies need feeding from both breasts, and I don't know which one this is for you because every baby is different, but if your baby needs feeding from both breasts, then they will probably need, at the end of that feed, you know they need another feed, even though they were falling asleep. So that's when you take them off, change their nappy, bring them back up to awake content, maybe fussing, but you know that you'll calm that fussing by putting them on the other side and go through the same thing. Call up milk, fast sucking, milk starts flowing, nutritive sucking, and then flutter sucking. For moms who are feeding from both breasts, usually the second breast feed will be shorter than the first because the bulk of the feed has been got on the first breast, and this one is more of a dessert. But still, I know that my baby needs to sleep after a feed, and it's up to me to help guide them into that. So understanding those 6 states of consciousness is really going to help you to help your baby to get enough sleep, and for you to understand a little bit. If they do need to cry a little bit, it's okay as long as you're giving them the comfort and that safe place for them to cry confidently and knowing that they are held and supported. And then just my little thing here to see what else. Right, calming techniques for a baby. We talk about the 5 S's. That's Harvey Karp. You can look him up, 5 S's, which is shushing, shh. You can either get little machines that go shh for you, or you can do it. Swaddling, so swaddling your baby nice and tight, helping them feel nice and contained. Lots of theories about swaddling, so find what works for you. And some babies don't like being swaddled. Some babies like it sometimes and not others. So trial and error. The other S is side lying. So holding your baby either facing outwards on their side with gentle rocking or facing this way on their side. Obviously, sucking is always going to work. And remember, sucking is not just nutritive, it's developmental. There are so many things. And I've got a video in my course about sucking with a neurodevelopmental psychologist, Dr. Beulah van der Westhuizen. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you watch that video. It's long, but it's worth it. And purple crying. So purple crying was a thing that is just a name that's given to babies who cry for seemingly no reason and what to do about it. And the reason they call it purple crying is babies tend to go really red in the face or purple because they've cried so much. And I spoke about it in a previous video of the importance of listening to your baby's cry and being the safe, calm place that they can come to when they are crying. So if you've met all their needs, they've fed, they've burped, you've changed their nappy, you can't get them to sleep because they are crying so much, is to just hold them and listen to those cries, knowing that it will end. And even if they cry for 2 hours, which will be very difficult and challenging for you to hold that for 2 hours, so make sure that you've got somebody who can hold you while you hold your baby. And by holding, I mean holding a safe and contained space of real trust. But after 2 hours, they will probably be ready for a feed, and then they will probably fall asleep, or they will just fall asleep anyway because they've exhausted themselves. But listening to that cry, and that's a whole subject on its own, so I don't want to go into it too much, but accepting and understanding that babies do cry and that it is their way of communicating with you. And then the last thing I want to chat about in this video, because the milk is now in, what you will notice is that babies do need a little bit more burping. I didn't mention it at all in the first 3-4 day videos because with colostrum, they don't have that much gas. And usually they're crying for other reasons, but gas becomes more apparent when your milk is in fully. And all you need to do is, one, trust that babies do have what they need to move that gas and manage it. And if those resources don't work, then that's when you need to step in and help them. And the little things that you can do is all really about positioning. And the typical way of burping a baby is generally with them over your shoulder, and you want the baby's head to be right over so that you can either do rhythmic patting on their back, or you can be doing gentle upward movements to help that gas out. Obviously, if you're doing downward movements, you're moving the gas down so that they're going to fart. So whether they burp or whether they fart, it doesn't matter. It's still moving that gas through them. Also to remember that gas, the formation of gases is a byproduct of the feeding. So sometimes they don't always burp immediately after a feed, and you might put them down, and then when you pick them up for the next feed, they burp, and you think, oh my goodness, they've been stuck with that burp for the last 3 hours. It must have been so awful. But if they slept through it, it wasn't awful. It wasn't uncomfortable. Gas is only a problem when it is uncomfortable for the baby, and the way that they show you it's uncomfortable is by their little fists are clenched and they're crying, arching their back, or their legs coming up into their belly. And that's when you want to help them to move the gas. For me, the easiest way of burping a baby immediately after a feed, and I'm going to have to move this down, is to rest the baby on your lap, ideally, and the baby will naturally fall forward, resting. You're holding their chin just with your hand like that, and my other hand, flat of my hand, goes up the baby. Let them roll forward, because by rolling forward they're trapping the gas over here. But then two-handed movement. One, I'm gently moving the baby forward with this hand that's under the chin. I'm moving the baby forward, and with this hand I'm gently putting pressure into the lower back so that the baby ends up sitting dead straight with the little head falling forward like that, and literally just holding the baby like that. And when I do that, what will happen most of the time is that gas will just bubble up, and it'll happen within 2 to 3 minutes. And if it doesn't happen within 2 to 3 minutes, you'll probably find your baby starts wriggling. If they start wriggling, release the grip on them enough to allow them to wriggle. let them fold forward again to trap the gas, and then straighten them up. Once you get comfortable using that method, you'll find that it works really quickly, really effectively. And if nothing comes up after 5 or 7 minutes of doing that, and baby seems to be all floppy and sleepy, then put them down. It's okay. If you put them down and then gas forms or whatever a little bit later, they'll let you know because they're uncomfortable, and they will start off by wriggling themselves. And very often when they wriggle, they'll either burp or fart and release it on their own, and then it's okay. So step in when they ask you to step in, if you haven't already got rid of the burp after a feed. The other thing that you can do, of course, is between feeds. And of course, this is when baby is awake and content, if we think of the six states of consciousness. So usually it'll be as they get older, when they wake up, they have a longer period of being awake and content before they start giving you those hunger cues. So we're not quite there yet because we are still only on day 5. So at this stage, your baby pretty much wakes up when they're ready to feed, and you probably only have about 5-minute window of awake content before they start showing hunger cues. But in that time, you might want to do little bicycle legs, okay? So, you know, those little bicycle legs and doing those movements. There's lots of little massage techniques, and I think what I'll rather do is make a separate video of those, because that's something that you can incorporate, but I wouldn't do it just yet at day 5 because the awake happy time is so short and the window is not quite enough. And what happens if you try and extend that and do something else is all you're doing is then you get to a late hunger cue or even a late sleep cue, which kind of interrupts what we're trying to establish, which is understanding sleepy and hunger cues and how to help your baby to sleep and getting feeding right. So I think what I'll rather do is make a separate video for some massage techniques. Right, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.